Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place for authentic conversations from those who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women in digital who choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections. You can join the movement at togetherindigital.com. It is my absolute pleasure today to introduce all of you to Jennifer Guttman. Dr. Guttman brings a wealth of expertise to our podcast today with a doctorate in clinical psychology from Long Island University. She specializes in training in cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma treatment, and family systems. For the past 8 years, she has been at the forefront of motivational branding with her sustainable life satisfaction platform, which includes a YouTube series, courses, and a workbook. We love getting in there and doing the work. I love that you have this workbook. That's fantastic. Her latest release, Beyond Happiness: The 6 Secrets to Life Satisfaction, published by Post Hill Press, has been making waves in the field. Dr. Guttman not only is a respected contributor to publications like Psychology Today, Thrive Global, and Mind Body Green, she is also a sought-after guest on major network television programs and numerous podcasts. Glad to add her to this one as well. With over 30 years of experience as a cognitive behavioral therapist, she has touched the lives of thousands of clients, fostering meaningful, transformative interactions. We are honored to have you with us here today, Jennifer Guttman, as she shares her insights and wisdom with us. Welcome, Dr. Guttman. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk to your audience.
Absolutely. As many of you know who have been a part of or are familiar with our content and conversations that we have here at Together Digital, while we are all hardworking, ambitious women who work in digital marketing and advertising, we love to pause and have conversations like these about mental health and just really focusing on the whole person, because we are whole people, right? And this is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? It's May. This is an important conversation to have. And I really, really was fascinated by your perspective, and something else I think as women who work in a space that is very heavily focused on methodologies, processes, and data. We love structure. We love steps and processes like these. So I was super, super excited to see that. And as someone who is deeply fascinated in a practitioner of mindfulness, really, really liked this kind of idea that you've got of really kind of looking at satisfaction versus happiness. So super excited to kind of dig into this more. Hopefully some of our listeners will take something away from this and, dig into this more, get a copy of your book, take a look at your YouTube channels and see what they've got. But to start, as always, I love to dig in a little bit more for the sake of our listeners to hear more about you, your background, and how you came to discover the power of going beyond happiness and finding what's more long-lasting satisfaction.
It initially started with some seminal moments. Lots of people have watershed moments in their lives, and I too had some seminal moments in my life. My son was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness that required surgery. I too was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, and then my father passed away, all in a relatively short period of time. And shortly after that, I said my children were going back to sleepaway camp. I settled them back into sleepaway camp. And then I purchased a one-way ticket to Europe. It was my first and only eat, pray, love moment. And when I purchased that one-way ticket, I packed a carry-on bag with the only idea that I had in my mind was to regain a sense of purpose, hope, and optimism. When I got to Europe, I was walking around trying to get a sense of what I was trying to get a handle on. I realized that I wasn't trying to find happiness again. That seemed incongruous with all that I had been through. I was trying to find a sense of satisfaction again, a sense of peace, a sense of contentment. And if I was going to find satisfaction again, which is what I believed had helped me, some tools of satisfaction had helped me through all of these challenges that I had just been through, then I needed to understand satisfaction better. I needed to embrace it, dissect it, understand it. And it was during that trip that the kernels of what would eventually become the Sustainable Life Satisfaction brand were born.
I love that so much. And then thank you for sharing that personal story. I think also another word that comes to mind is unburdened. We
Mm,
love doing like
yes.
personal development type stuff here. And we talk a lot about our word of the year. And that was very close to being one of my words of the year was unburdened. And I was like, that's not the right energy that I need this year. It's definitely a future word for me. But I love that idea of that sense of comfort or not complacency, but, contentment. You said contentment as well.
Contentment.
That's a good one. That's a good one,
Contentment. Yeah.
especially when you have been through so much. And I can only imagine having two of those types of diagnoses plus losing your father in one
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
It's a
That
lot.
was
It's a lot to
a
come
lot.
out of. And sometimes that's all you can wish for, right? Is sort of
Right.
that just level set.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
what is your take on the distinguishing that kind of between the fleeting happiness, like you said, the chasing that sort of that ideal happiness, joy, and
Mhm.
that more lasting satisfaction? I want our listeners to understand this, especially because, like I said, we've got a lot of overachievers in the crowd, and they're very ambitious in their goals when it comes to their lives and careers. So I would love to kind of put a finer point on this to kind of help them level set those expectations.
Yes. I have found that most people, so many of us, feel like we're supposed to be happy all of the time. In fact, I recently opened a popcorn bag and it said, "This popcorn is going to make you happy." And I looked at that and I was like, really? Happy? Satisfied, baby, but happy? And I think that we see these things all the time. So it's no surprise then that I've had thousands of clients come into my office over the past 30 years telling me that they feel like they're failing at being happy. But you can't fail at an emotion. Happiness, like all emotions, comes and goes. It's not meant to be long lasting. Happiness is a dopamine hit. It's based on something that's happening in the external world. It's how you feel when you see the first snowfall or how you feel when you see a shooting star. Yes, it feels great in the moment, but it passes. It comes and goes. But satisfaction is different. Satisfaction is how you feel at the end of a really productive day. Satisfaction is how you feel when you finish a really good book. Satisfaction is a feeling of contentment. It's a feeling of peace. Satisfaction is something that you can feel right within yourself, something that you can learn with the right tools, something that you are in control of. And in that way, it is sustainable and attainable. It's not that you're giving it up to somebody else. The thing with happiness is if you're expecting a job or a relationship to provide you with happiness, you're destined to be disappointed. But with satisfaction, because you're in control of it, then you can make it happen for yourself, which is why when you move beyond happiness, you can achieve satisfaction.
Hmm. I love that. You can't fail. Excuse me. You can't fail at an emotion. I wrote that
Mm-hmm.
down. I hope
Yep.
some of you who are listening right now did too. Live listening audience, I'm addressing you, one, because you're listening live now, and two, because you're going to get the chance here at the end of the conversation today to ask Dr. Guttman questions. So use that chat. Our amazing, my co-pilot, Kaylee, is dropping also links in the chat as well. So I want to direct your attention there so you can check out all of the great links that she's dropping in there. She's got Dr. Guttman's website, her Instagram handle, as well as her YouTube channel, also all kinds of great stuff. We'll include those in the show notes as well. But yeah, ladies, for those of us who love to chase those metrics, you cannot fail at an emotion. I love that so much, Jennifer.
It's funny because I say to people, like, nobody's going to say that they would fail at sadness, but they feel like
Right.
they could fail at happiness. And
I'm just not happy
it's like
enough.
that doesn't work, like
Right.
all of these are emotions and you
Mm-hmm.
can't fail at any of them. So when people are saying that they think that they're unsuccessful at being happy enough, you'd never
Yeah.
say that you'd feel like you're being unsuccessful at being sad enough.
Right.
And that's why, an emotion is an emotion is an emotion. They're the same.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel all of them, but we feel all of them for some piece of time, that's expectable. But
Yeah.
satisfaction is the thing that can, cross all of those boundaries. And that's the thing that we can sustain.
So, how would you say then that sustainable life satisfaction, this approach might resonate with our listeners who are juggling, demanding careers, personal lives? They've got jobs in industries that are fast paced. We were just talking before we got on the call here about kids and high pressure jobs that are traveling a lot, things like that.
What I talk about in my book is 6 different techniques that can be applied to people in fast-paced jobs, people that are people in all walks of life really, but definitely people in fast-paced jobs. And when I think about some of your listeners and what they may be dealing with, I think about one of the techniques in my book, which is avoiding assumptions. And
Mm,
what I think about is that it's important when you're in a fast-paced job and you're juggling a lot of demanding expectations, both at home and at work, that you not get caught up in thought spirals, replaying situations in your head, replaying conversations in your head, because you need to be able to move forward quickly. And that's why it's important to avoid assumptions so that you're not wasting precious mental energy on things that have already happened. We are, as human beings and descendants of mammals, very biased towards a negativity bias,
mhm.
because we literally in our DNA, we are natural worriers, because we are born from predator, worried about predators. But we're not right now. We don't have to worry about catastrophic occurrences in the same way that when we were mammals, we needed to worry about these predators. So that means that we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we do skew towards a negativity bias. And you can think about that in terms of how many of us are like, yes, I'm definitely going to get that promotion. We don't think about life like that. But instead, we worry that we're not going to get the promotion. So we tend to skew negatively as opposed to skew neutral or positive. But honestly, it's a third, and a third. Like there's a third possibility that things are going to go positive, a third neutral, a third negative, but we don't tend to think like that. We tend to skew negative, which means we have a responsibility to be mindful and intentional about watching out for that negativity bias and you know, pivoting back to neutral and positive to make sure that we don't give into that. And one of the ways that I suggest in my book that you can manage this with an action step is, let's say that you're in a thought spiral worrying about an interaction that you just had with somebody, and you think you might be making an assumption about it. Imagine a jury of your peers in your mind and ask yourself, do I have enough evidence to convince a jury of my peers that what I fear is about to happen is actually true? And if you don't have enough evidence, actual evidence to convince them that your fear about what happened is true or your worry is true, then you need to pause and wait until you've collected more evidence before acting on that assumption. And I think that that's incredibly important, because it's hard to convince people that what you just are thinking in your mind is true.
I love that. I say that to my daughter often. Like, just because you think it doesn't
The-
make it true.
exactly.
And is it helpful?
Exactly.
Is it true? Those
Exactly.
2 things. But I love the jury idea. We might be leveraging that one next. She's 10,
Yes.
so it's like that whole negative self-talk, it
Yes.
starts so early and it's so real and it stays with us for so long. Obviously, here I am in my 40s and it's still something I,
Yes.
constantly
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
constantly working on.
so hard, so
Yeah.
hard. I mean, of the 6 that I wrote in my book, avoiding
Yeah.
assumptions is the hardest one that's still for me, so
Right. Yeah. And, avoiding assumptions too, when you were speaking of it, it reminded me of this whole problem I have of like, I used to have, I feel like I'm much better at it now, is like rumination,
Yes.
right? And that
Right.
mental energy and
Yes.
mental load of
Yes.
rumination. You're right. It can
Yes.
be such a burden. It impedes upon your sleep. It impedes upon your ability to think clearly, to think forward versus ahead, on things.
Yes.
Um, and one other thing I had kind of learned through the practice of mindfulness was like attachment to outcome.
Mhm.
And that whole notion of, like, being attached to everything being a certain way, but then also realizing that just because things don't go a certain way, it's like, that doesn't mean that things aren't going to go fine, right? Just because it didn't happen
Absolutely.
exactly this way doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be bad per se, right?
Absolutely, because the door that opens to the next possible option
Mhm.
could turn out just as well as the initial option that you had anticipated. You just don't
Absolutely.
know organically how it's going
Mhm.
to turn out. I mean, the way that we anticipate, you know, a potential outcome
Mhm.
could be great, or it could be that other possibilities are great too. I mean, sometimes
Mm.
we play these mental chess games in our
Yeah,
minds, like moving pieces around the board, thinking that we know how things are going to turn out.
play
But
out.
those
Mhm.
games tend to not work out the way that we anticipate, because the conversations we have with people, the actions other people take, we can't really anticipate their moves. And
Exactly.
because of that, we can't really anticipate how it's going to turn out. And what ends up in the end happening could be even better than what we anticipated when we were playing this mental chess game in our minds.
Oh, 100%. I can't tell you how many guests I've had on this show where they have kind of come and bared their soul and told me that they were at the pits of their life, like, they were at the bottom. They lost their dream job, or things just
Right.
kind of went to hell in a handbasket, and then everything turned around, and it was that moment of getting back up off the ground that they had that moment, that epiphany, that idea where they were like, "Oh, this is the thing. This is the moment. This is the time in which I'm gonna figure this out and do the thing." So,
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Exactly.
And then you've got another book, Beyond Happiness, and within that, you talk about, the secret of life satisfaction. I'm kind of curious, how do you believe that it could be useful to our listeners who are maybe striving for success while also seeking personal fulfillment? I think there's, like, that struggle, right? We use that
Hmm.
term and we throw it around
Hmm.
a lot, work-life balance, and I know everybody finds that word a little noxious, triggering. Some people don't believe it exists, but I'm kind of curious your thoughts and ideas on that.
Another one of the techniques that I talk about in Beyond Happiness, I mean, I talk about avoiding assumptions in Beyond Happiness. And another one of the techniques that I talk about in Beyond Happiness is that in order to achieve personal fulfillment and success in different areas of your life, is that it's really important to be authentic in the choices that you're making. And it's very difficult to be authentic in those choices, because a lot of times we want to follow the path that somebody else is setting for us. And
Yes.
people that care about us often have ideas about what our dreams should be for us, what our passions should be for us. But our passions and dreams may not be in alignment with what those people want for us. And that can get
Mhm.
very complicated. And for that reason, it's important to learn to one of the techniques in my book is reduce people pleasing behaviors,
Mhm.
and it's there because it's important to reduce people pleasing behaviors, because it's important to be able to not subserve what your passions, desires, and wants are in the service of what somebody else wants for you. As humans, we have a strong need for connection. So we're at risk of falling victim to something that's called sociotropy, which means foregoing the desires that we have for ourselves altogether in
Mm.
order to maintain social connection at all costs. But that inevitably leads to us giving up all of our dreams, which can then eventually lead to dissatisfaction and resentment.
Mhm.
One of my clients is an investment was in investment banking, and that dream of becoming an investment banker really was something that was a path that she was put on because of her family. And
Mhm.
while she was an investment banker, she realized that, like, this wasn't something that really interested her, and she really wasn't satisfied. What she really wanted was to go back to school and get a PhD in art history and become an art historian. And that created a lot of tension with her family and within herself. But eventually she did take the brave step of, grabbing onto her dreams and passions and leaving investment banking and getting the PhD. And today she's much more satisfied with her life, and her family has come along. But in order to do that, it means, like, taking charge of reducing people pleasing behaviors, setting boundaries with
Mm.
people, and becoming better at saying no to things that feel inauthentic to you early on. And that's difficult. Some of the strategies that I suggest to people is practice saying no and not apologizing for yourself, so that it doesn't give people a door to continue to make requests of you that may feel inauthentic to you. I think that it's something that's really important to model for our children also, so
Mm.
that they see that boundary setting is an okay thing to do, and that they should feel comfortable boundary setting, not not just with others, but even with, like, with us, with their parents.
Yeah. I love that so much. I think that can feel like such an overwhelming task, especially maybe for women, because I think we are
Yes, totally.
overly conditioned to people
Yes,
please and to serve and
definitely.
to give more than take.
Yes, yes.
And I think a lot of times we get like a deer in headlight situation when we're talking to women and we're like, well, what do you really want? At Together Digital, we have what we call our ask and give exchange. And we really try to encourage our members to step up and ask for what they need. No guilt, no shame. But you
Right.
ask a woman to ask for something and they're
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
I don't even know
yes.
what to ask for. Or you
Exactly.
ask her, what do you need?
Yes.
And she's like, I mean, she's thinking of a million things. She is.
Yes, right, and then but she says, "I don't know."
Yeah. Or it's
Right,
like
thinking
the
a
first
million things,
thing
but the
she
words are, "I
wants
don't
to
know."
say is nothing because
Right,
you're just so used to
exactly.
not
Right.
even thinking about asking
Yes,
for anything. So your suggestion and advice is to really start small, right? Is to
yes.
look
So
for
it
those
starts
spaces and places.
right. Start small. I mean, honestly, I think that it's also just not rushing in to do things so much for other people that you forget to like focus on what your needs are. Because I think that also women are so easy to like try to guess about what other people's needs are, rush in to help other people, that then
Uh-huh.
they're stop being mindful and attentive to what their needs even are. I mean, their needs are taking such a backseat that they're
Mhm.
not even attending to what they are because they're so busy trying to focus on what everybody else needs. So, one of my suggestions is pause before you rush in to help other people. Wait for them to ask for help, which they will. So instead of me rushing in to guess about what people in my life need, wait for Jennifer, I need help with this, or Jennifer, can you help me with that? So once I'm asked, I can help. But before that,
Mhm.
wait so that my mind isn't clogged up with trying to like guess about what everybody needs. That will help me be
Yes.
a little bit more attentive to what I need.
I love this. I'm going to give an example and I'm going to make myself the example. Because this came out for me recently in therapy. I've been doing really good at getting back to like the gym and things like that, carving out that time and space for myself. And I guess just by proxy, my husband's like, I need to go to the gym. I need to go to the, and every time he says it, I go in and I'm like, okay, what time do you want to go? I will watch the kids. Do you want me to start putting it on your calendar? Let's sign you up for classes. My therapist is finally like, Amy, did
Exactly.
he ask you to do any of these things? And I
I
was
love
like,
that.
crap, no. She says, you need to just let him say that and just let it sit. And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And I'm thinking then I start to see it, right? I start to see how many times people just put things out there where they'll just say one thing and I jump on it and I just start to do it
Mhm.
for them. And I'm like,
Yeah,
crap.
exactly.
Okay. I see it now. So I just wanted
Yes,
to share that because I hope that helps some
yes,
of you maybe start to be more aware of
yes,
just
exactly.
just a little nugget.
Yes,
What's
yes,
for
yes,
dinner?
yes, yes, yes,
I have practice.
yes.
What's it gonna be? What's that little nugget gonna be that drops today for you, ladies and gents? That you're just gonna pick up on and you're gonna not even think twice, and you're just gonna figure it out and take care of it for everyone else before you even
Yes,
think about it for yourself.
yes, exactly,
Oh my goodness.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
Anyhow.
So much of that. I mean, there's so much of that where, like, literally, we're having
My
whole
whole day.
conversations for them with ourselves. I mean, we're doing the whole
Me
conversation, like
too.
the whole thing. Like, we started and ended all on our own.
It's so true.
We did the whole thing. We take care of the whole thing. Nobody else has to do any thinking.
And all of a sudden, the uniform's there, the snack's taken care of, dinner's made, and they're out the door to practice. And they're like,
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know. I just said I
Oh
have
my
practice and it happened. I don't know.
Right,
It's great.
exactly. And then some
Man,
of
oh
my
man.
clients are like, I don't understand why I'm not being appreciated. I'm like, well, it wouldn't be a surprise if everybody thinks the fairies did it since like the whole
Right.
conversation is happening around them. Of course they think the fairies did
It's magical.
it.
We are
Exactly.
magical.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. Let's keep going. Oh boy, this could be a rabbit hole for sure. It's a massive hole. I'm definitely digging. All right. Could you share some insights into resilience building that might help some of our listeners, particularly those who, this is a perfect follow-up question. We're handling multiple responsibilities a day, whether those are, self-induced or otherwise.
Absolutely. I talk a lot about resilience. And in order to build resilience, it means that we have to learn to trust in our ability to cope and our ability to pivot quickly, especially if we're dealing with multiple things at one time, or if something doesn't work out the way that we had expected it to, which is we were just talking about a little bit earlier, that we need to make sure that we know that we believe in our ability to course correct quickly. All of those things are what builds resilience. And that means that we have to make sure that we're comfortable with our problem solving ability, our decision making. We make an incredible 35,000 decisions every single day. 35,000. Think of that number. And most of us think that of those 35,000 decisions, they're high stakes, right or wrong, irreversible. So that makes those 35,000 decisions very stressful. And of those 35,000 decisions, they can be very small decisions all the way up the ladder to larger decisions like, should I ask for a promotion? Should I switch jobs? What curfew should I give my children? I mean, they're very varied decisions, and down to like, what should I make for dinner? What we don't realize is that decisions are actually just guesses. People don't talk about how that's really, at the end of the day, what a decision is. It's just a guess. Some of them are well-informed guesses. Some of them are just guesses. But when people tell you that they're more objective in making a decision for you than you, that's just not true. A guess is what a decision is. Some people may be guessing with more education. Some people may be guessing with more experience, but they're not guessing with your lens. The only person that can actually guess with the best lens about your life is you, because you're the only one that has seen your life. And by and large, no decision is irreversible, most decisions. Once you make your best guess, it's important to remember that if it doesn't turn out the way that you expected, you can pivot, open another door. Open a door and you will see that there's the next best solution. As long as you have the flexibility of mind and the creativity of thought to find what the next best solution is. And that's how you actually build resilience, having that faith in yourself. One of my clients she was a CEO of a company, and almost all of her friends were retiring to Florida, leaving their jobs, and there was a ton of pressure on her to do the same. And she was entertaining it because there was so much noise around her to do that. And then one day she was walking through the halls at her job and she thought to herself, I don't want to do this. Nothing about this feels right to me. Like this feels like it's right for them. And then very assertively, she said to them, I don't want to do this. This is ill-timed for me. Like, this is through your lens. When it's right for me, then I will stop working and leave. I think that what's important is to think about the action steps that are involved in making decisions and reminding yourself about the fact that they're guesses. And that starts with owning the decision. Own it as your own. And then remind yourself not to make assumptions about what other people are going to think about your choices, because there's no right or wrong choice. How can there be a right or wrong choice if it's just a guess? And then remind yourself that you can always pivot. There's always the option to pivot. Then evaluate your decision and decide if it didn't work out the way you had hoped. Is there something that you would change the next time so that you can use that information to help you in the future? And remember to reinforce yourself after you make these guesses and decisions, because it's much easier to delegate decision making than to take it on for yourself. So often we do delegate decisions. When you make decisions, you should reinforce yourself by doing them. But ultimately, I think it's critical that people remember that we're the only one with our own DNA and our own fingerprint, the only one. Who better to make the best decisions or the best guesses for us than us?
I love that so much. Yeah. Don't delegate that decision-making power over to anyone else, but it's so easy to do, right?
It's so easy to do. I mean, it's so easy to do.
And it's such a disappointing thing. I wish I would have heard you speaking on this like 5 or 10 years ago, like to talk to Amy of then, because I back then especially such analysis paralysis.
Yes,
I am
totally.
I am very, I'm an Enneagram 9. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram types or anything like that, but I am they're like the peacemaker. They're very much about harmony. They really want, that kind of like, in the sense that they just don't want disruption. They don't want conflict or anything like that. And so sometimes it's hard to try to own those decisions when you know it's going to disrupt the lives or the thoughts or the opinions of others. And so that was always like a hard thing for me when I was earlier on in my career. And so like I even remember there was a time when I was kind of poached by another agency and offered double my salary, and I still was sitting there like, I feel bad for leaving. Should I be going? And I'm looking back at
Loyalty.
myself now. I'm like, you goober. Like, what were you thinking? You should have been like just riding out on your high horse, being like, look at me go. It is so funny, but it was that whole sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm creating a disruption. I mean, I was doing well at the company I was at. I was winning awards and doing good work and getting accolades and moving up in the company, but they couldn't touch that offer. And I was like, and I don't know why I just didn't just, walk on out with my head held high. It was really a difficult thing for me. And, I struggled with the decision probably a lot more than I should have.
Right,
And again, it's
right.
not always just about the money either. It was like, it was a good move. It was a good position, a good opportunity, a good move to a good company. So, but it is just so funny. You talked earlier too about it. I think that kind of comes back to that like whole rumination and avoiding assumptions. We start making assumptions. We worry, okay, what is everybody else going to think about this choice? Why are you worrying about
Ex-
that?
Exactly. And that's how they're all so interrelated. What you just said is perfect because you can see how within what you were going through,
Mm-hmm.
avoiding assumptions is involved in that. Reducing people pleasing behaviors is involved in that. Making decisions is involved in that. And that's why when you look at my book, the
Uh
6
huh.
techniques that are involved in the book are all
Uh huh.
very interrelated because becoming a master at all 6 techniques is necessary because they
Yep.
are all so tightly wound together. They coalesce
Mm-hmm.
together. And in your story, you just said it so beautifully because there are pieces in all the different aspects of your story that relate to all of those different techniques. And it's important to think about all of them
Yeah.
when you're going through a story so that you can dissect what the struggle is that you're going through in a
Yes.
difficult decision like that, because there's so many aspects of it that make it difficult.
Well, and I think what ultimately that does for you right there is creates the clarity because it gets the roadblocks out of the way.
Yes, yes,
Your book's
exactly.
going to be a gift for a couple of my friends right now that I know are struggling with some things and they are like, but I don't quite know. And it's, I think
Right.
for me, like being kind of like outside of certain things now, I'm like, I,
Yeah.
I'm seeing what it is.
Yes,
Like, you're
yes,
not there
yes,
yet, but I really do. I think your book's going to be a great, great guide for that. It's going to help remove a lot of those roadblocks.
yes,
All
yes.
right,
Thank you.
let's talk
Thank
about
you.
some one of my favorite topics, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and how can these techniques be helpful for some of our listeners? Maybe we define that too, in case people aren't familiar with what that is, in managing stress and maintaining our well-being, especially given the pressure of some of our roles in our lives at work and at home, maybe.
Mhm. In cognitive behavior therapy, we work individually with people to help look at what potentially their thoughts, how their thoughts might be interfering with their behavior, and try to address any cognitive distortions that might be interfering, and also help with uh, relaxation techniques and other behavioral techniques that might help them optimize their life more effectively.
Mhm.
I'm going to talk about a few different techniques that would be very easy to implement at home or at work that won't take a lot of time but have very good results. One of them is a relaxation technique that's super easy that you can implement anywhere. It's called box breathing. Some of you may have heard of it. What box breathing is you just inhale for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, exhale for a count of 3. And you do that round like 3 to 5 times until you feel more relaxed. Another one is self-talk. How you do self-talk with cognitive distortions is cognitive distortions are related to thinking errors. There's 4 different kinds of thinking errors, or main ones that I focus on usually: magnification, minimization, fortune telling, and all or none thinking. I think if I run through the definitions of all of that, it's going to get like a little overwhelming. So
Okay.
I'm going to just focus on fortune telling for a minute. Fortune telling is expecting bad things to happen. So the idea would be if you identify that you have a cognitive distortion of fortune telling, expecting something bad to happen, you might notice that you just had a bad interaction with your supervisor. And then because you had this bad interaction with your supervisor, you go back to your desk, and then your mind goes into a thought spiral that you're going to have a bad review because you had this bad interaction. And as a cognitive behaviorist, I would say, where is the evidence that bad interactions with your supervisor lead to bad reviews? Do you have evidence that in the past, bad interactions, a bad interaction with supervisor led to a bad review? And likely you would not have that evidence. And then barring that evidence, I would say balance your thinking. And then the balanced thought would be, I don't have evidence that bad interactions lead to bad reviews. Bad interactions are just bad interactions. And then that would decrease your anxiety from, let's say, if you're measuring your anxiety on a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being the highest, might decrease your anxiety from an 8 to, let's say, a 2, which would be far lower. And that's what you would do with any of these if you were magnifying or all or none thinking. Mm-hmm. Another technique that you can use, like a quick and dirty technique, is called a thought stopping technique. It's a rubber band technique. My clients love this technique. Basically, what it involves is putting a hair tie or rubber band around your wrist. You have a negative thought. It could be one of these, like, I'm going to get a bad review. It could be, any negative thought that you're having. When you have the negative thought, you snap the rubber band on your wrist. Don't give yourself any welts, but snap it so that it does sting. And you tell yourself to stop. So I'm going to get a bad review. You snap the rubber band, tell yourself to stop. Distract yourself with a pleasant memory. The pleasant memory could be a vacation that you took or a party that you went to. Distract yourself with a pleasant memory. And then brains don't like to be snapped. So likely you will then think of something else, but you will go back likely to thinking about the bad review. Snap the rubber band again, tell yourself to stop, and then think of the pleasant memory. In the beginning, you will be snapping the rubber band a number of times when it comes up with a review, but like, as I mentioned, brains do not like to be snapped. Because of that, your brain will learn to stop thinking about the bad review, because otherwise you're going to get snapped. And then as your brain doesn't want to get snapped, the idea of the bad review will go away and you won't be snapping yourself anymore. This technique works extremely well for a lot of things. I've given it to people for lots of negative thoughts about a lot of things, like not getting a phone call back, not getting an email back, not getting a text back. Like, it can work for conversations and truly, brains get hip to when you're going to do something painful to it very quickly. And like, you will stop. And then there are mindfulness strategies that you can also engage in. There's tons and tons of mindfulness strategies. Mm-hmm. I think that a quick one that I can say right now is just like, you can get yourself grounded in a chair or in your office or at home, like feel your body in the chair. Put your feet on the ground. Notice how your body is sitting in the chair. Close your eyes. Say your name and the date and your address, and the location you are in your home. And then just keep repeating to yourself 3 or 5 rounds your name and the date and your address and your location in your home, so that you're grounding yourself in space and time 3 to 5 times. And when that is over, once you open your eyes, you should feel calmer.
I love it. Those are all so fantastic. And they are such great tools, because it's like you can be anywhere, anytime,
right,
using those things and doing those things. I think, because we're all running around doing lots of things all the time. And they're great tools and tips that we can use for ourselves, for our family. So those are great, great ones. One I learned recently, if you don't mind me sharing too, one was heart-centered breathing. I just learned recently.
Oh.
And just kind of goes with the fact that, like, physiologically, obviously it's like our minds influence our bodies, but our bodies influence our mind just as much, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
so we were talking about how, like, our heart rate obviously influences how our brain is responding and is reacting to certain things. And so whenever I'm kind of getting like racing kind of thoughts, or I'm having trouble slowing my nervous system down, outside of like putting my hands on top of my head, which is one that I like to do to kind of slow myself down. I also practice heart-centered breathing, which is like placing my hands on the center of my chest, closing my eyes, doing some of the box breathing you mentioned. But by actually focusing on breathing from my chest and focusing on slowing down my heart rate, actually slows
Oh,
down my brain kind of
that's
speed,
great.
because the heart rate is directly correlating and affecting my brain speed.
That's
So
great.
yeah, and like I guess there's like even like a little machine you can get that's like measuring the space between your heartbeats. That is also
Great.
affecting like your brain waves and things like that. There's more science behind it that I still haven't totally nerded out and learned about yet. But I was like, oh, I learned this like 2 weeks ago, and I'm telling
That's
everybody about
great.
it because I think it's
That's
so cool.
great. That's great. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's really good.
Yeah,
I love it.
it's
I
so
love it.
fascinating to me because it's like those things, right? You get scared, and it's like sometimes our body and the way like adrenaline hits us, it doesn't know the difference between physically, it doesn't know the difference between scared and excited. It's just the way our brain decides to react, right? The emotional
Yes.
response is just the way
Right. You
we
get
decide to
sympathetic nervous system
respond.
response for yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to me. So
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, let's talk a little bit about self-care because that's another important aspect of sort of this
Mhm.
whole in my opinion conversation. Do you have any tips for our listeners on fostering patience, giving ourselves grace, self-care in the midst of busy professional and personal lives?
I think that in like how busy and overwhelming like our lives are between personal and professional, especially in today's modern day world with everything hitting us so fast with
Mm,
technology, it's
yeah.
easy to forget about self-care, but self-care
Mhm.
is critical in order for us to return to whatever tasks we're doing refreshed and with the most effective and efficient brain space, which means that we have to intentionally and purposefully take charge of our self-care. And the way that I look at it is you need to decide like at what point or after what task am I going to engage in self-care, which means being super attentive to it so that you have a plan around it. And one way that you can do that, besides figuring out when or after what, is to create a list of what kinds of things could I do to take care of myself. And the examples of things would be, you can write down something that you can do or something that you can purchase or you can do, or even like a note you can write to yourself. What do I mean by that? So something you could do would be like go for a walk, take a bath, cook a special meal for yourself. None of those things take a tremendous amount of time, and many of them are things that you would normally fit into your life, maybe just in a little bit of an elongated way, so that you're adding an extra 15 minutes to them. And so you're just giving yourself an extra 15 minutes of grace. Or something that you like to buy. Now, sometimes when you buy something for yourself, you're pausing to purchase yourself something that you're going to like to do in the future. But it's the pause to do something that's nice for
Mhm.
you, that shows that you feel worthy of something that you're then going to get excited about for something that's going to happen in the future. So you might buy yourself tickets to a movie, tickets to a game, or even buy yourself flowers. But it's that pause that can
Yeah.
have a double, you get like
Benefit.
a double worth, the pause and then later on doing it. Or you can simply write an affirmation for yourself in the notes app on your phone or in a notebook. But I think it's critical to engage in self-care and not wait for somebody else to encourage you to do it, because the outside world is not going to encourage us to do it. They're not going to remind us to
No.
take care of ourselves. The outside world is fickle and unreliable when it comes to like, hey, you've done a great job, you should take a mental health day. Like, that's not going to happen. So it's
Mm.
really important that we figure out a way to build it in,
Mhm.
because our brains need that refresh in order to honestly, in order to work as effectively as and optimally as we're hoping to work.
I believe, yeah, I agree, and I think as you're kind of like I'm wondering too, like, how would you correlate that in with, like, satisfaction, like, that long-term sense of satisfaction?
So the sixth technique in my book is active self reinforcement and self care. Like, that is the
Mhm.
sixth technique, and the reason that it is in there is because I I think that people are very over focused on delegating reinforcement, validation, the need for
Mhm.
self care to the outside world. And they've been bred like that. If you think about participation trophies, gold stars in elementary school, we've been bred that the outside world is supposed to
Yes.
give us feedback about when we're deserving of certain things. But
Mhm.
in the end, the external world doesn't really do that. It may do
Yeah.
that a little bit when we're young, but then it sort of just like falls off of a cliff and it doesn't do
It's
that
true.
anymore. And we're
The gold
waiting
stars
for
go
it
away.
and it doesn't come, right? And I have so many clients who are at work wondering why they're not getting any positive feedback at work. They get negative feedback, but what happens is that most of the feedback they get is nothing. And they interpret nothing or neutral feedback as negative, which is
Yeah.
not the case. Neutral feedback is just neutral, but they
Mhm.
interpret it as negative because they're not getting positive feedback. But
Yep.
the fact of the matter is, at work, you just don't get positive feedback in an adult world most of the time, which
Yep.
means you have to do something for yourself in
Yep.
order to convince your brain to continue to do challenging things, or your brain's going to be like, why should I keep doing this? And in order to create a positive feedback loop, you have to create the positive feedback loop and say to your brain, I'm in charge of this now. I am.
Mhm.
So if I'm in charge of this, then the reward will definitely be dispensed because I'm in charge of it. And you don't have to worry about the external world anymore because
Mhm.
now I'm in charge.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that I write about in the book and I talk about with my clients when a lot of them are lamenting, I don't understand. What does it mean if I hand in a deliverable and I hear nothing? And my answer is it means nothing. like,
Yeah.
honestly,
Right?
it means
It means it
nothing.
got done. It means it
Right.
happened.
Exactly. You did it.
And it can mean a lot if you let it mean a lot. Like,
Right.
I just
Right.
yeah. You know what? The longest relationship you'll ever have with anyone is yourself. Just be
Yes.
your own freaking best friend.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know? Be your own
Exactly.
best friend. I,
Exactly.
I know it's maybe easier for me, but, like, because I own and run my own business, but I have quarterly me treats. It's like a
Yeah. Oh,
day I
I
take
love
off
that.
once a quarter, put it on my calendar. I decided when we did our, Together Digital, we host an annual, what we call our goal getters. It's kind of like authentic ambition, like goal setting type of thing, um, workshop. And that was my goal for last year was like, I'm going to schedule quarterly me treats. And honestly, it was like, I didn't do anything crazy. I went to like the library free, went to the art museum free, went to
Exactly.
the conservatory free, took myself to lunch or brunch, and that was like the only thing that like cost anything.
Right.
And it was a wonderful day. I spent
Right.
like an hour inside of an art exhibit, and when I came out, the guy was like, "You were in there a while." I was like, "Yeah, I had no children. I read every placard. I watched every video. It was great."
Awesome.
That
That's
was my
awesome.
self-care, was just
That's
getting to go
awesome.
somewhere that I normally
Uh-huh.
would go with kids, and it's like I don't have time to read or look at
Right.
anything and, like, really get to pay attention. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I'm a big self-care fan and really just finding out what works for you because, again, self-care I think sometimes gets, kind of stereotyped into being, like, certain things, and it's really
Yeah.
about, I think, exploring what truly kind of makes
Yes.
you
Yes.
feel like that's why I love your idea of satisfaction, like, feels that
Mhm.
sense of just
Yes. What feels
contentment and
right to you.
happiness and
Yeah.
joy kind of a long term, and then just sort of doing that thing and not being ashamed of it and just kind of getting in there. And yeah, spending an hour and a half looking at glass. You know what, dude? Just deal with
I
it. I'm
I mean,
happy.
it really has to do with like getting away from the shoulds. Like this should be the thing that you do
Yes.
for self care.
Yes.
Ignore all shoulds about everything in your life and focus on like what feels like the right thing to do. Like for some people, walking a dog is going to
Mm.
feel like a chore, and for other people, walking
Oh my
a
gosh, it's the best
dog
time of their
is going
day.
to feel like self care. And so
Uh-huh.
that's why it has to be
Great point.
authentic because that's the most important thing. Like
Mhm.
somebody's chore could feel like someone else's like passion.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've got a couple more questions here for you that we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left. So I just want to make sure our
Yep.
listening audience knows they always have the chance to ask questions if they would like to as well. One other question I wanted to kind of put another pin on here, kind of just building off of the last few questions we've had. How do we ensure that? Oh, no, wait. Sorry, I jumped ahead. Given the competitive nature of our industry, advertising in particular, and marketing, it's pretty competitive. Do you have any subtle but maybe effective ways or techniques that you could recommend for boosting confidence? I know that that's something that a lot of our members, when we survey them, talk about either that or just a sense of self worth.
I think that the best way to boost on a regular basis, the
Hmm.
best way to boost self worth and self confidence is using self talk.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think that to boost self worth and self confidence, using the 6 techniques in my book would help overall boost self confidence. But on a daily basis, besides the 6 techniques, I think that you can also use self talk to boost self confidence. And that as part of the sustainable life satisfaction method, there are responsibilities that you have to yourself that you can remind yourself about every day. And they are a responsibility to yourself to believe in your right to be true to your authenticity, drive, passion, and inspiration. Responsibility to reduce your negativity bias. A responsibility to not let other people's opinions dampen your desire to fulfill your dreams. A responsibility to embrace challenges and opportunity for growth, and a responsibility to find validation and reinforcement within yourself instead of from the outside world.
I love it. All such good stuff. Seriously, all my friends, I hope you're listening. You're all getting copies. How do you ensure that the strategies for achieving life satisfaction are inclusive and considerate for our listeners who are maybe coming from diverse backgrounds or have different needs?
I consider sustainable life satisfaction to be made up of three things: part cognitive behavior therapy, part positive psychology, and a big dose of Jennifer.
I love
As
it.
far as cognitive behavior therapy and positive psychology goes, I brought that skill set to my counseling from the very beginning. It was interactions with those clients in the very beginning that helped me begin to understand happiness versus satisfaction and how I was going to guide people into an understanding of what satisfaction was, what satisfaction meant, how was I going to understand satisfaction. And those interactions helped me once I began to dissect satisfaction. And I spent the first 10 years of my career in a family homeless shelter. The clients that I saw during those 10 years had very diverse backgrounds, had very diverse needs. And those were some of the best 10 career years of my life. It was amazing. And it was an extremely difficult job to leave. And the only reason that I left that job was because of the birth of my second child. Even 20 years later, I still keep in touch with some of the residents from that family homeless shelter. They have kept up with all of the work that I've done since I left the shelter, supporting through emails, the work that I'm doing with sustainable life satisfaction. They write to me about it. And at the same time, it gives them the opportunity to update me on their lives, their children's lives, now their grandchildren's lives. And in that way, I know that sustainable life satisfaction is something that crosses boundaries and is considerate of people with diverse needs and diverse backgrounds.
That's fantastic. Yeah, at the core, all human. All human. I
Yes,
love it.
exactly.
That's wonderful.
Exactly.
That is wonderful. So let's dispel some myths and misconceptions, which I always kind of like to do. I usually do this earlier on, but I actually kind of stuck this towards the end just to kind of poke some holes if we've got any sort of lingering doubts out there. But what are some common myths or misconceptions about finding balance or fulfillment in life that you would like to address, particularly for, let's say, high achieving women like us?
I think that there's a belief, a myth, a misconception that we can have it all and be happy. And that's just not true. And I think social media propagates this myth with things like LinkedIn and Instagram.
Yeah.
LinkedIn and Instagram show snapshots of people excelling at work and excelling in their personal lives as if they're doing that at the same time. And when they show us snapshots of this, then we fill in the gray areas of these snapshots with mental movies romanticizing these people's lives and then minimizing our own lives. And it makes us feel badly about ourselves. And what it does is it makes it seem like they're defying common humanity. Because common humanity is what defines the struggle, even if it looks like someone has figured out the key to success. So when they are doing that, it's doing common humanity, which would bind us all together in a really positive way, a disservice.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was doing a series of talks last year talking about how connection is a form of self-care and how community is really essential and forming kind of more transformative versus transactional relationships is so essential. And finding community and connecting deeply and meaningfully with others is so important, because perceived loneliness and isolation is on the
Yeah.
rise, even like
Yeah.
since the pandemic, even before the pandemic. It affects us even physically, not just
Mhm.
emotionally and mentally. And I was equating it a lot to that sense of the comparison trap, right? We see
Yeah.
things on social media and we constantly compare ourselves, and it's like that's a great way to make yourself miserable, is to
Yeah.
just constantly compare yourself to others, because again, we know what goes on social media. We're marketers, we get it. We
Yes.
put the pretty pictures out there, we make the pretty pictures, we write the lovely captions.
Yeah.
And so to fall into that comparison trap, it's just a great way to make yourself miserable. And we know that success without strife is not necessarily real. While others might have a tremendous amount of privilege in their lives and be able to kind of achieve certain things without maybe as much strife, it just isn't a thing. Like, there's still struggle. And that's why I love, bringing in guests into the Together Digital space, having the conversations that we do, where women are willing to be open and vulnerable, whether it's here or in our Slack channels or at our events, to be able to share like what it's really like to go through some of these things and have these experiences, so that women know that, yeah, like, you can do it. You can do the hard things and have the hard things and get through them and kind of come out the other side. And I remember once, it was a while back, gosh, I can't even remember her name now, and I feel terrible. This woman, who was like a really high up banker, at one of like the top 5 banks in the country, was up there on stage, and they had asked her that question of like, how do you have it all and do it all? And she was like, I don't know what that means. Like, she just flat out just like
Exactly,
dissed their
exactly,
question, which I
exactly,
loved. I wanted to just like stand up
exactly,
and give her a round of applause. I was
exactly,
like, would that be really
exactly,
weird? One person in the crowd be like,
exactly.
yeah, tell them.
Exactly.
And because this was like
Exactly.
10 years ago now. And she says, I don't really think that there's ever an all. There's just what
Right.
I have now, and I'm just grateful for what that is. And what what all is today is going to be different than tomorrow, and what my all is going to be different than what her all is, and then what her all is. Because I think this was a panel, if I remember right. And so she's like, I'm just really, I'm there, that I'm just sick of that saying.
Totally.
There's
Yes.
just really no
Yes.
such thing.
Yeah. Totally.
I love it.
Yes.
So I'm glad you're in
Exactly.
agreement there.
Yes.
All right. Last question, since our live listening audience just seems to be wrapped in the conversation. If you guys have any questions, though, of course, feel free to reach out to Jennifer. All of her information and links are in the chat. Thank you, Kaylee, for being so awesome and dropping all of those in there. Looking back on your experience, what timeless principles or lessons have you found the most impactful for individuals like our lovely listeners who are striving to lead fulfilling lives amidst very busy professional lives?
I mean, trying to find balance is a tricky business. I mean, in
Mhm.
my opinion, personally, in my opinion, professionally, there will be so many moments where you feel like you're not operating optimally personally at home, or you feel like you're not operating optimally professionally at work.
Mhm.
And there are going to be so many really, really hard days. I think that the key is to look at it holistically, because if you look at it on a day-to-day basis, that's going to not be a recipe for finding fulfillment.
Yep.
I think that if you're looking for to assess fulfillment or balance, the way to assess that is not daily. Look at it monthly, look at it yearly, because the days are hard and there's no way to get around that. So my suggestion is zoom out, like
Mm.
out.
Mhm.
And what do you see when you zoom out? How does it look from a distance?
Mhm.
And it's when I do that that I can really assess how I'm doing in terms of my feelings of fulfillment, and how I do in terms of how I think I'm doing in terms of balance.
I love that so much. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. I think that's such good advice. We had a journaling prompt one that was that where our 80-year-old selves had to go back in time and like visit us in the present and like kind of give ourselves that perspective of like how things were going and how things went. And I was like, oh, maybe that's how I'll think of things. Is like that zoomed out 80-year-old me.
Too.
How did we do? How are we doing? I
Right.
love that advice. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This was such a great conversation. I really hope you all found it as helpful and informative, as inspirational as I did. Like I said, loads of great links in the chat. Hopefully, you guys get the chance to grab those. If not, they will be added to our show notes. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been
Thank you.
fantastic. I really do appreciate your work and everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun. It was awesome. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. That's all we've got for you today. Until then, everyone, take care. We hope to see you next time. Until then, everyone, keep asking, keep giving, and keep growing. We'll see you later. Bye.
Produced by Heartcast Media.